Watching Fox 9 all day.
Well, by all accounts, it's been a pretty rough road for the Office of Cannabis Management. Recreational marijuana, as we know, was legalized in Minnesota. It was August of 2023. In September, the governor nominated an OCM director, and she ended up resigning within days over reports that she was selling illegal edibles. So here we're going to fast forward 1 year, a little over 1 year, and the OCM still has an interim director. There have been a series of pitfalls. Minnesota now on track to be the third slowest state to go from legalization to licensed retail sales. So joining me now is Charlene Briner, who was named the interim director of the Office of Cannabis Management last January. We want to thank you for being here first and foremost.
Thanks for having me, Amy. It's great to be here.
All right. And Charlene, clearly you have heard loud and clear all of the criticism. So first, what do you want people to know about the last year plus at the Office of Cannabis Management?
So I would tell people that we are making progress to getting licenses out the door. Minnesota took a very different approach in its original law. And I would remind folks that cannabis is still federally illegal. So every state has taken a different approach. And Minnesota's approach was quite different to the roadmap that was used or the legislation that we see in other states. And so while people are really focused on timeline, I think that the law is playing out in the way that the authors and the advocates intended, which was to create this smaller craft market that was not dependent on the large operators. And so we are making progress. We're going to get licenses out the door. We had to do a bit of a pivot last week based on some challenges, but we're making good progress. And in the meantime, there are hemp products at 4,400, almost 4,500 registered retailers. We were the first state in the nation who had tribal sales, so had legal cannabis sales on day one of legalization. And when people think about the pace, they should remember that unlike other states, we didn't flip the switch to just turn on the medical market to serve adult use. We're building this industry from the ground up.
And yeah, could I go back just for a moment? We'll break down some of those points. The first one being, you brought up the roadmap, and I think a lot of people are looking at this and saying, well, why not just follow an existing? So what was it about Minnesota and the way this all came about in Minnesota that made it so challenging?
So I don't know if I would say that it's made it so challenging. It's just made it different. So let's take one key example. So what we've seen in other states that have legalized adult use, many of them had existing medical programs, which is also true of Minnesota. But those medical programs were far more robust. So for instance, in Hawaii, they had 8 medical manufacturers who were serving the public. In Minnesota, we have by law only 2. And of those 2 medical manufacturers, there's only 1 dispensary per congressional district. So even if the law, which expressly actually prohibits it, would have allowed flipping the switch so that those medical dispensaries could have served the adult use market, it would have been just a fraction of what is anticipated to meet customer demand. The law made a very different distinction in the way they're standing up that market, because the thinking was you want smaller businesses, you want an easier point of access, you want homegrown product because you can't transport across state lines. And so doing that required us to take a very different approach. And so it's not just flipping a switch to let medical programs serve adult use. It is building this market from the ground up.
Okay, and again, I'll get to some of the points you just brought up because there's a lot of good information in there. But I want to talk a little bit about this pre-approval lottery that is part of one of the sort of hiccups now to putting this on pause. And we keep coming back to the pacing of this, and I'm sure you understand why. And I'm sure you acknowledge that is one of the main concerns of a lot of people is the slower rollout. But this pre-approval lottery, for folks who don't know, was open to veterans, people who have been negatively affected by marijuana laws, and some of those who were denied have now filed lawsuits. So it's kind of slowing things down. Things are on pause right now. What will that do? Well, that part of it is on pause. What will that do to the sales timeline? I think of June of 2025 is what we last saw. Is that correct?
So I think that we've been really clear to say we're not going to anticipate when we'll see first retail sales in the commercial market. Our goal has always been to have rules in place by the end of the first quarter of 2025, and then to also make sure that businesses who obtain a license from us, once those rules are in place, are ready to follow their own pacing to open their doors. So some businesses, given the pivot we did last week, we have 648 pre-approved applicants who will go into the next stage of licensing. Depending on their readiness, and what that means is, have they secured their building? Have they hired their staff? Have they gotten their labor peace agreement? Have they gotten their local zoning approvals? Depending on when all that lines up, they could be in a position of opening up within a matter of months. All of those pre-approved licenses, 194 are what we call micro businesses, which are those small vertically integrated businesses that can do everything from cultivate to manufacture to retail sales. Not every micro business is going to do all of those activities, but among them, I would suspect that a pretty high number, even let's say it's half of those micro businesses are intending to cultivate, we could see product that is ready for retail sales, and those businesses could be selling as soon as they've got all of their ducks in a row. So when a business operates or when they open their doors is really dependent upon the individual readiness of that operator. Just like a restaurant, you know, you get all your approvals, you get your license from the city, you get your liquor license or whatever you need. And then when you have your grand opening or your soft opening, that's kind of depends on when you have all of your other pieces in place. So it's going to be individual businesses. We've always said that this market's going to mature over time. Yeah. We will see these businesses continue to come on board over the next several years, but I think I'm pretty optimistic about a 2025 launch in the way that we always have been.
How about when it comes to the growing piece of this? People ask about the seed to sale, and that takes time. And you mentioned how bringing in product from across state lines is not legal. Yeah. So where do you anticipate that these retail business owners will get their product?
So like I said, we're going to have micro businesses that are going to start cultivation as soon as they obtain their full license. So we've got among those 194, I expect some cultivation to happen there. We're also actively engaging in compacting with several Minnesota tribes that we believe will be serving the commercial market. Some of them will just want to do retail, some will do cultivation, and we'll continue to bring cultivation on board even when we open for licensing in February of next year. Depending on the number of cultivators that we have in the queue, we can look at how we want to stage the market by making sure that we have cultivation happening in advance of retail sales. So we've got a number of things on that front that should provide initial supply. I would also say, as with any new market, supply and demand is going to evolve. And so it is even those that have flipped the switch from their medical programs to adult use, there may be some initial supply shortages. There may be some supply that doesn't have a retail outlet. So we're going to see this market continue to mature and play out over time.
Can I ask you about the black market? Obviously, one of your goals would be to eliminate it. Tell us about any progress that you've made on that front and what your plans are moving forward.
Well, Amy, that's a hard one to answer right now because cannabis sales without a license are illegal. So by definition, other than home grow, right, any cannabis sales that are happening commercially would still be considered the black market because we don't have licensed cannabis sales. We are required in law to do a report to the legislature annually that will give us a status update on the black market. What we've seen in other states is that it takes some time to do that. Consumer habits need to change. You need to have sufficient saturation after several years of a legalized market. And so we'll watch that over time, but right now there are no licensed cannabis sales other than on tribal lands or in the medical program. And so anything else by definition would continue to be the black market.
Okay, we just have a couple of minutes and I have so many questions here. I actually asked a local retailer to weigh in, and one of the questions is there are so many tobacco and vape stores that are not following the rules set forth by the OCM. For example, THCA, vapes, flower, higher potency edibles. Besides fines, what can be done to safeguard the public? And if these stores have no intention of getting a retail marijuana license, do you just keep fining them and then, you know, just keep fining and fining? Or I guess what happens to those who are playing by the rules? They may want to know, you know, what about these guys over here?
Right. So the good news is, and again, so legalization happened, so people can possess, consume, can grow, can do all of those things. But it happened before OCM actually was even in office, right? Or before we actually had the infrastructure in place. We are currently enforcing and regulating. So we are issuing fines and other penalties. Any sale of cannabis by a business operator without a license would be considered a violation of Chapter 342, which is the law that governs us. And violating that actually precludes you from obtaining a legal license in Minnesota. So it's a pretty hefty price to pay for a short-term gain. If you are intending to apply for a license, you could be actually preventing the opportunity to get a license. We also work with a series of escalating enforcement. So we've always said we need to educate operators on what's expected. And then over time, if they show us that they're unwilling or unable to follow the law, then our penalties escalate up to and including, if we need to, engaging with local law enforcement partners if that's necessary. Or as you saw, we sued an operator who had consistently been violating the rules. All of that said, I think there's really promising news. I get a weekly sort of update on the number of inspections completed and what compliance rates are. When we first started inspecting, probably about a year ago at this time, when the programs were still over at the Department of Health, we saw probably a 25% compliance rate in terms of products that were in compliance, properly labeled, properly limited by potency. Our last week of inspections, we saw about an 87% compliance rate. We've been hovering above the 80% mark for quite a while. So our enforcement presence is paying off. People are getting the message that we're serious about them adhering to the rules and to the law. I always say that the rules may not be in place, but the law is. And so the expectations to abide by the law are clear from our office, and we continue to see improvement in the number of people who are operating within those parameters.
Okay. Charlene, you're the interim, and a little birdie told me you are not interested in the director position. Yeah. Is that accurate? And what can we expect as far as getting a director in place?
So, Amy, I am incredibly proud of this team, the team that we have continued to build. But I didn't grow up dreaming of being a cannabis regulator. I have a long career in state government, and I really believe in the work that we do, particularly when it comes to health, public safety, education, and making sure that people can make informed choices. So I'm really honored to be stewarding the office during this time, a little longer than I intended. And I'll be very happy to support a transition when the governor makes a decision about who should be leading this office next.
Okay, final question with about 15 seconds left. When can we expect a finalized OCM rule?
So we sent our rule package, our initial draft rules, over to the reviser in mid-July. We have been going back and forth. The reviser's office has to put them in a specific form. We hope to get those back from them shortly after the beginning of the year. And we are on pace to having those rules in place by the end of the first quarter of 2025, as we have always targeted.
All right. Charlene Briner, Interim Director of the Office of Cannabis Management. We really appreciate you taking some time today. Hopefully a to be continued conversation as the story continues to evolve. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
You bet.